Okay, I just want to elaborate on the Basil J. Hiley papers on mind and matter and non-commutativity in quantum physics that Basil, Professor Basil J. Hiley published around 20 years ago or 25 years ago, around that time period. And he does a great job of discussing the Bohmian quantum potential in layman terms without a lot of technical. There's a couple of equations, of course, but he's mostly focusing on the concepts of non-commutativity and what this means in terms of the meaning of reality, the ontology in science. And one of the key points of the quantum potential is that the amplitude of the energy is also in the denominator as well as the numerator of the ratio in the quantum potential equation that he developed with David Bohm. And so what this means, having the amplitude in the denominator, is that a very small change can self-amplify into the macro scale. And the Bohmian quantum potential is used to then explain various mysteries in quantum physics that a lot of people aren't aware of, but various experiments that have been done. The most famous, of course, being the double slit experiment, which most people know about. But then there's also the delayed choice eraser experiment, and also the quantum teleportation, which most people have heard of now in terms of quantum computing. And what else? Let's see. Those are the three main ones. And so essentially what Basil J. Hiley discusses is that you have a redistribution of the passive quantum potential with the active information energy as kinetic energy that's associated with the particle. And so the quantum potential, being passive, is a non-local field, and it contributes to the active particle information energy. And so that's ends up conserving the overall energy, but it does so by having this redistribution occur from the future. And so the quantum, what this means is that before any measurement takes place, as an external measurement, you already have this exchange of active information with the passive quantum potential of the non-local novel force. So it's considered a novel force that then can self-amplify And so the delayed choice eraser experiment is the best example of showing how this future affects the past. And the whole point of the Bohmian quantum potential is to be able to explain these paradoxes without resorting to some kind of metaphysical explanation that has no falsifiability. And so the weak measurements have been the best experimental demonstrations of the Bohmian quantum potential, as Basil J. Hiley has discussed more recently, and he has been working with Professor Robert Flack to set up the actual weak measurement experiments demonstrating the non-commutativity of the quantum potential. And they started out using photons, but the Robert Flack's experiment is going to be using argon. And so by using a particle with mass, that will corroborate the non-commutativity in terms of general relativity. When you use a photon, you have this a special relativity implication. But for a true unified field model, then you need the mass involved. This is my understanding. Of course, if anybody wants to correct me about that, go ahead. But I have corresponded with Professor Robert Flack, and he said their experiment had been put on hold due to the pandemic shutting down the university laboratory, and so now they are back at it. And I heard from him probably about 6 months ago. So I have not tried to correspond with Basil J. Hiley since then. I think I last heard from him maybe a few months ago, and he gave a talk a few months ago on YouTube. But of course, he's younger than Roger Penrose, but they're both still active, but not they're most people are retired at that age, so but they're still keeping at it, so that's awesome. And so the one thing that Basil J. Hiley, he says this is a radical reconstruction of physics and geometry as we know it. And the key point here is that that when we say radical, or when he says radical, and of course I agree with him, is that there's a structural change in science as a new paradigm. And when he replied to me that he hasn't analyzed non-commutativity in terms of gravitational entropy, and that because that's what I asked him about and what I've been interested in because of Roger Penrose's comment about how gravitational entropy is the opposite of the entropy of matter. And so when we consider radical, we need to consider that all of science thus far has been based on commutative geometry or symmetric mathematics as this structural application of the technology. So all of our what we consider to be technological progress and efficiency is actually due to an increase of gravitational entropy and an attempted decrease of the entropy of matter. But when we realize that matter is actually fundamentally made of photons, and the photon is then defined by this paradox that Louis de Broglie first discovered as the law of phase harmony, then you have this deeper non-commutative dynamic of the photon that is non-commutative, and it creates a secret mass of the photon from the non-commutative momentum. And so this is just straight up ignored by mainstream physics. And unless there's a few scientists that have recognized this. So Professor B.G. Siddharth in India is one of the most prominent examples. And he doesn't cite the work of Basil J. Hiley or John G. Williamson. John G. Williamson was collaborating with Martin Vandermark, who also wrote about the photon in regards to Louis de Broglie's law of phase harmony and how this changes the definition of mass in a radical way. And he co-authored with Nobel physicist Gerard de Hooft. Their article, Light is Heavy, is focused on this. That essentially, when you define the photon by momentum, you no longer have this assumption of a symmetric center of mass, for measuring the mass as a center point. That's symmetric mathematics. And instead you have this non-commutative time frequency. And then, of course, Fields Medal math professor Alon Khan has realized this same secret of the photon being non-commutative time frequency ever since Heisenberg discovered that the spectroscopy measurements are non-commutative in the Ritz-Rydberg combination principle. And that was the origin of the matrices mathematics from Heisenberg, and Born and Jordan Pascual developing that non-commutative matrices mathematics. But as math professor Lewis Kaufman has detailed, that this actually originates from Clifford algebra, and that's Basil J. Hiley's emphasis also, is the Clifford algebra, which is actually, ironically, it's older. It's an older algebra from the mid to late 1800s, and it being a non-commutative logic that actually, I guess Hamilton was the first to develop that algebra that's now considered a quantum algebra. But the point being, for to bring it back to the mind and matter implication, is that in biology, as Basil J. Hiley is discussing, in terms of quantum biology, you have essentially this non-local dynamic going on that is guiding our reality, that is beyond the physical external observations of matter, and also beyond thinking. And this is why David Bohm was interested in Eastern philosophy so much, because that's essentially how Eastern philosophy has been defined, as this same non-commutative process. Of course, in the traditional Indian philosophy, it was actually defined by a symmetric logic from the Brahman Vedic philosophy, and that's actually the true origin of Western symmetric-based mathematics. But there's an older philosophy of India called the Three Gunas, and that's considered the oldest philosophy of India, but it's more like from the Tamil philosophy, and that is the true non-commutative dynamic that is also explained by music theory. And so it's kind of like hidden inside the philosophy of India. It's also found in Taoism, of course, and Pythagorean philosophy, but it's actually the truth of music theory, but it's hidden inside of Western music theory. It's not taught. Typically, Western music theory is taught based on the symmetric commutative geometry logic, and in fact, the origin of the Western mathematics is from this wrong music theory, as I've detailed. So that's been my focus. And so the problem is, of course, is that when people learn science, they are learning the wrong mathematics of the commutative geometry, and then they learn the wrong physics, the classical physics. And so when Basil J. Hiley says this is a radical reconstruction of physics and geometry, he's not joking at all. I mean, it's truly radical. And Eddie Oceans, working at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, which was also heavily influenced by Louis de Broglie work, he argued that the non-Western meditation training as a mind-body transformation is due to non-commutativity. And so he was the only one who figured out that the non-Western neigong is what he called it, which is the internal martial arts in China, but it's also found in just in general in the non-Western meditation training as a mind-body transformation. So he realized that the non-commutativity was the crucial, key, important logic, and he was collaborating with math professor Lou Kaufman, and then Basil J. Hiley is citing math professor Lou Kaufman, and I've corresponded with Basil J. Hiley about his citing of Lou Kaufman. And so basically there's this small network of scientists. I mean, non-commutative geometry, there's a journal on non-commutative geometry, so obviously there's a growing group of scientists who have their career is focused on non-commutativity. But in terms of quantum biology, this is where Basil J. Hiley has focused these mind matter papers that were published 20 to 25 years ago, and he was co-authoring them with a Finnish neuroscience professor, and they have continued to work together. In fact, this neuroscientist was interviewed recently by Tim Ventura on Tim Ventura's YouTube channel, and Tim Ventura also does an alternative propulsion research group on YouTube, and essentially he in this interview with Pavel his first name is Pavel. His last name is it's Finnish, so I won't try to hack it up. But they never mentioned non-commutativity. Not once did they discuss it. So the problem being that it's very slow for the concept of non-commutativity to get discussed or accepted into the general public. And actually, Basil J. Hiley's work with Pavel has not been focused on non-commutativity. So Basil J. Hiley, he published a paper on non-commutativity around 2000 or 2001 that discussed the mind matter biology, quantum biology issue. And then his latest article in 2022 with Pavel, there's a phrase at the end where they say that, quantum biology, it's considered to be limited by the decoherence of the quantum wave function. And so essentially the quantum non-locality collapses, and then you lose the significance of the quantum energy because it goes into a classical scale. But they point out that this is not true in non-commutativity. It is not true. So the non-commutativity resonates into the macro scale. And this was Eddie Ocean's big point also, is that the non-commutativity is still active in the macro scale. And so Basil J. Hiley very much makes this point that non-commutativity is not limited to the quantum scale, but it's actually this radical restructuring of physics as a whole. And of course, the implication being that our science, when usually science says, well, mathematics is the truth because it works, but and then it works due to this symmetry. But the way the word works is defined is relative. It's by rejecting or ignoring the ecological crisis. So in terms of quantum biology, when we think of life originating from negative entropy, then or negentropy, as Erwin Schrödinger first wrote about in the 1940s, 1945. This again comes back to the gravitational entropy issue as being the opposite of the entropy of matter. So when physics says, well, mathematics works, they're ignoring the fact that the attempt to decrease the entropy of matter with technology has increased gravitational entropy on Earth, and has done so by destroying the gravitational negentropy or negative entropy of life, the origin of life. And so this is like the big externality of physics itself, where we say physics works, but it does so by increasing the gravitational entropy on the planet by destroying life as biological annihilation. And so you end up getting, 50% of physics is actually like funded by the military. And then, of course, the military is the largest destroyer of life on the planet. And so when we say physics works, we're assuming that there can be this constant military expansion, which has pretty much already happened all over the planet. But then, so what's left? Well, then they got to try to conquer space and expand out into space. So there's this increasing fixation on, outer space travel or whatever that means, like trying to live somewhere that is not our ecological home. And we can't even control the ecology of the planet in terms of having the proper oxygen, fresh water, fertile soil, clean air. And so, like when they try to do Biosphere 2, they had a contained environment, and they try to pretend they're in outer space, but it didn't work. They had fake oxygen, and they ran on it. They were running out of oxygen or whatever. I mean, the whole thing just collapsed in itself, and it turned out to be a disaster. And they haven't really tried to do that again. But there's these grandiose claims that we can have synthetic ecology in outer space, um, or maybe underground or something. I don't know, and that we can just geoengineer the Earth's atmosphere without considering the cause of the problem, which is essentially what Joseph Fourier first discovered in 1824. So 200 years ago, he published how the effects of human industry, quote unquote, and I am quoting now as Heem Karsaroy says on WeOn News, and now I am quoting the effects of human industry, end quote. That this is what Joseph Fourier published 200 years ago, where would increase the dark heat, quote unquote, dark heat being the infrared radiation, and this is the global warming as the driving force of biological annihilation on Earth, and being a byproduct of human industry, and the increase of entropy through energy use. So when you have the energy use defined mathematically as whenever you try to mass reproduce technology, and this is what people want. They say, well, if you want to prove something, it should be mass reproduced, in experiments. But non-commutativity shows that this is not true, that the truth of reality is an eternal changing, an eternal transformation as negative entropy. So it's totally against any kind of symmetric mass reproduction as the matrix, as what they call the matrix of the symmetric. In the matrix math, you have to convert everything back into symmetric commutative geometry as a commodity, as a mass reproduced commodity, standardized mathematics. And this has been the case ever since the Civil War in the U.S. That's how the Union won the Civil War against the Confederacy. And so of course, some people are still trying to support the Confederacy in the U.S., which is crazy. But we can that just demonstrates the deeply alienating effects of human industry in the modern sense of the word ever since the 1800s. And so in terms of progress, as Basil J. Hiley says, there's this radical structural change of physics from non-commutativity. But the irony being that, as Basil J. Hiley says, this is a primitive, what does he call it? A primitive mind matter reality, because he's saying primitive in the sense that it exists before linear time, so it's a pre-space reality but it's also primitive in the sense that it was acknowledged in our original human culture going back 200,000 years. That's what DNA science has now proven, that our original human cultures from 200,000 years ago when you combine DNA science with anthropology and archaeology. So our original human culture was based on this primitive non-commutativity that was the core truth of what it meant to be human and support life on Earth. And that was the case until agriculture developed through a previous global warming type of the end of the last ice age that created the Younger Dryas event. That was most likely a shutdown of the AMOC, the Atlantic meridional, something like that, meridional ocean circulation. And now they're saying that shutdown of AMOC is going to happen again, possibly like in 10 years, but so people underestimate the acceleration of the ecological crisis as biological annihilation, that Mother Nature is taking revenge. They call it Kali, the era of the age of Kali, as Kala, as time turning back on itself. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much.